My name is Brittany Haynes. I'm the Director of e-collections at IGI Global, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you all and have the experts behind our first premier open access publication to talk a little bit about their work. So we are here today to do flexible OA support in academic publishing, IGI Global's premier platinum open access book in collaboration with the University of North Texas. And this was a really exciting project to be a part of. I was able to collaborate directly with Dr. Alemneh on my side of things. Obviously, he also worked with our editorial and production teams, development teams, as well as his chapter authors. It's been a real pleasure also to work directly with the University of North Texas Library on this project. As we know, the open access movement is really taking over, spreading from Europe far and wide, and that's definitely something that IGI Global has on the forefront of our mind. So without further ado, I do want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Daniel Alemneh. He is the editor of our first open access book publication, and he's going to talk a little bit about the book and this process, and his chapter authors will also be talking about some of their chapters as well today. So Dr. Alemneh, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you so very much. It's indeed an honor, to be the first actually to publish in this new flexible arrangement. Of course, increasingly, more and more publishers are starting this kind of new flexible arrangement. But I think University of North Texas, deservedly, as a proponent of open access movement, yeah, it's wonderful to be able to get the opportunity to be the first in taking advantage of this publisher and institution collaboration. So, as you can see, the title of the book is Open Access. It's focused on open access. So we call it Global View of Open Access in Scholarly Communication. So it really makes logical sense to publish open access. When we start actually the project, so many authors asked us, is this going to be open access? Because they are advocates of open access, and they want to make sure we are living, what we are preaching. So, but at that time, this arrangement was not there, so I couldn't guarantee it's going to be open access. But we will figure out, as we go, because it's a year-long process anyway. So we are very, very happy to finish it in open access environment. So the book covers a full range of important scholarly communication topics, including open access initiatives in various settings and disciplines, ethical issues, copyright challenge, stakeholders' roles, policy frameworks, and current and emerging trends in open access and scholarly communication. So the vision actually driving this book was developed, essentially to promote adoption and socially relevant outcome through advocacy. So the authors have been educating about open access issue, advocating about open access issue almost for the last 2 decades. So most of us have been involved in conference presentation and various advocacy activities. So this is a process. Even if the book published this year, the process goes back almost 10 years. When I look my own scholarly output, like in our institutional repository, there are like 200 plus items. Half of them actually in one way or another talk about open access, including students who I advised or served as thesis or dissertation committee members. So it's amazing how long it will take to the idea to develop and to mature and to get to where we are. So in the next, actually, if we move forward, we can see the full activities of book writing, really, even from publishers' workflow. I mentioned about the preliminary activity, before we get the community endorsement to push forward the idea of open access, at global level. Then once we start the book proposal, the whole activities really took us huge, almost a year. So I remember the first proposal was written in December, January, like January 2021. Then once it's accepted, when it kind of joins the workflow of the publication. So in February, we put together advisory board, and then we immediately send out call for submission. So for this book, we actually received 62 proposals, very strong actually. So, as you can see in the phase 2, in the right side, we had to make sure that topics are represented, the diversity are maintained. Diversity in a sense, institutionally, there are only minimum from one institution or region or even country, because we said it's global. So we want to make sure the topics and the issues represented global view. So in our selection, we focused, yes, we focused out of those 64 proposals, we accepted 32 based on this criteria. Some of them are really good, but because the topics are already covered, or sorry, or more numbers of proposals received from one institution, so we have to reject even some good proposal, just relatively. So we picked 32, and we moved on to the next workflow to receive the full chapter. So again, out of those 32, we picked 23. So based on the detailed feedback from our reviewers, usually three blind reviewers behind, even if 32 people wrote good kind of chapters, but they couldn't incorporate the reviewers preliminary comments, so we only move forward with 23. After those 23, again with the second feedback, we rejected 5. They couldn't put it into in the same level we wanted. I really want to have 20 chapters. We really worked with those 5 to enhance the quality, but with the time pressure and everything, we forced it to reject other 5. So the final chapters are 18. So we published 18 chapters from 40 international authors, who just turn the open access lens closely on various aspects of scholarly communication. So the author, as I mentioned earlier, really carefully wrote those chapters based on the theme of the book. And actually, we divided the theme into 3 thematic headings, as probably saw it. So the first sections was open access initiative and scholarly communication practices. It focuses on lessons learned kind of chapters. The next section was about adoption, embracing open access, and direct implication. In the last section is various issues. We call it navigating the open access ecosystem. So from copyright to authors publishers relationship and similar issue. So that's where this read and publish initiatives becomes really useful modality for us, because now we are ready to publish. So the fact that IGI kind of helped us to take advantage of this modality. My institution fully endorsed this book. It makes sense, as I said. Again, we should even say a little bit about University of North Texas initiative about open access. We have annual conference, symposium about open access. Well, I don't think many institutions have that kind of commitment, really. So it makes really sense, and it's really good reward and recognition for our university effort in promoting open access. Even recently, our university have promotes OER in order to reduce the cost for students. So there are so many initiatives, student level, faculty level, university level, really, so I think the fact that my book becomes the first, my university becomes the first to take advantage of this arrangement, really rewarding in a way. So, but the open access issue is really complex. In fact, after the current pandemic, the open access issue kind of amplified in a way, just from just academic issue, it becomes even social issue. I think, we push further, the envelope to make open access issue, it concerns more of social issue, and actually in the coming ACIS conference, we will have another paper accepted on the issue of epistemic injustice issue, about how such issue can be overcome or even reduced using this open access movement. So this is only the beginning, really. I'm sure now the authors are here. They will talk about their aspects, but one of the authors here focus on this issue. But it shows how this open access is really gaining momentum. Already the emerging new modalities also shows support that. In my acknowledgement, I try to show the whole players behind, so from authors to reviewers, from my institution to the publishers, and even the future, how it's setting up. It's just the timing is ripe finally, and how even the current pandemic even highlighted, amplified the needs and the value of open access. So I will return back during discussion, but I'm sure my chapter authors have also interesting concepts to build on this. So without further ado, let's move on to our chapter contributors review. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Alemneh. We are going to go ahead and move forward, and I apologize. I was having a little bit of technical issues with our PowerPoint. I think we are back on track now. So I did want to go ahead and introduce our first chapter author, Dr. Bayena. He is from Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, and he did produce chapter 2 of this publication, Open Access Initiatives in Ethiopia's Higher Learning Institutions. Dr. Bayena, are you with us, and are you able to go ahead and talk a little bit about your chapter for us?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first I want to give you some background about myself. I am a librarian for Addis Ababa University. Addis Ababa University is the largest university in Ethiopia, and at the same time, I'm also chairperson for the consortium of Ethiopian libraries and research academy, and I'm a faculty member of the School of Information Science. So I am happy to publish a book chapter as part of this transformative agreement, because the librarian, I know what this means. So I can see this is a great success. So maybe this chapter, Open Access Initiative in Ethiopian Higher Learning Institutions, I will not go in detail, but some of the issues raised in this chapter are, this open access publication is becoming a norm even in the Ethiopian higher learning institutions. Currently, researchers, they would like to be visible. They prefer to publish in open access outlets. Even these higher learning institutions and even the regulatory body of higher learning institutions, they are adopting open access policies. You can see the open access policy, which is adopted by the Ministry of Science and Higher Education in 2019 is a typical example. Even local journals which are being published in universities, they are fully open access. Currently, government is investing in building national and institutional platforms to make open access. Even institutions they are conducting training about open access. They are creating awareness. Even currently, open science initiatives like research data management and providing publications in preprint archive is becoming a norm. So the whole idea of the book, the chapter, revolves around this issue. I don't want to say in detail. One last issue that I want to say is the Platinum publication outlet that is made between the University of Texas and IGI is a good initiative for developing countries like Ethiopia. So I can say this is exemplary. So in this chapter, the focus was we review policy frameworks in Ethiopian higher learning institutions. We review open access platforms, the national open access platforms. We even review some of the actors, the champions that create awareness in open access movement. These champions include international champions like Eiffel and CERL consortium, and also Addis Ababa University was also part of this. So these are the issues raised in this chapter. I think some of the university, Addis Ababa University, is planning to start this platinum publication or this transformative agreement with some publishers. So this book is a good one. Maybe this will be exemplary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bayana, and for sharing about your chapter and for being on this publication. We are next moving on to the author of Chapter 4, Dr. Priyanto from Gajah Mada University in Indonesia. Their chapter is titled The Struggle of Open Access Publishing, the Indonesian Perspective. Dr. Priyanto, did you want to go ahead and share your perspectives?
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here to share what we have done so far. But I'd like to thank you to IGI and also to Daniel, who made our chapters possible to be published. And this is my second publication of book chapter from IGI. First was in 2014. Well, my topic in this chapter is about open access in Indonesia. That especially I discuss about open access about repository open access, and then open access for books, also open access journals. These three are interesting to write about because there are some issues that we should be aware of. Especially in the developing countries like Indonesia. Actually, I like to write or I like to do research on open access since I found that open access in Indonesia began around 2010, about 2010. And then it developed well in the last 12 years. And well, some issues that I mentioned, especially because of the problem that some librarians and also the scholars experience something like contradictory things, so that anyone should be aware of. So I wrote there in the chapter about how the repository works in Indonesia, especially in terms of open access, and then also the books. And I think book in open access is actually very challenging for anyone in Indonesia because this topic, I mean, the book publishing is still, we still do not have much publication, and we still need books. So with the open access, actually, we will have more readers. The problem is about the who will initiate to write, because we still have less writers for books, but we have more writers for journals. But in journals, we especially write the open access journals in Indonesia, in Indonesian, because this is a requirement for the open access. I mean, for the journals to publish in Indonesia should be open access. So this is a good idea actually for the open access journals, because everyone can publish their research in the open access journals and wide readerships. The problem is because most of the open access journals are written in Indonesian, so still not much readership. So that is some of the point that we should be aware of. And then I also mentioned about the open access repository that I have just mentioned. That is the one that I was interested in a long time ago, because I found that open access is not quite understood by especially librarians. That was from my study in 2015, that if librarians do not understand much about the open access, but they can do the practical side. So open access repositories now developing well, but only in the uh, practical side and the technical side. I mean, so that is also an interesting point that I think maybe there are some other countries that experience similar things like Indonesia. And I also mentioned about the possibility of everyone to write and then publish in the their universities, and then they also publish, and then the librarians also write, and then I mean the librarians manage the repository so that everyone can read. For the journals, that is fine, and then the books, e-books. So I just mentioned as well then, and that ebooks is a bit problem for the ebook commercial ebooks, but for open access this is fine, because sometimes we still I mean some readers are still against the copyright. They so when they have open access ebooks, I think this is a good opportunity for everyone to write and to read. So those three access repository, for example. So that is the point that I have written in the book chapter. So thank you very much, and I hope my chapter is interesting to read. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prianto. I will say at the very end there, it seems you did get cut off a little bit with connection, but what we can do is when we come around to the Q&A, if individuals had questions about clarification on that, definitely feel free to bring that up. But it was just that very last sentence there. So I think for the most part, we were able to hear you the whole time. Thank you so much, Dr. Prianto. All right. Next up, we do have Dr. Angela Ford from Judson University in the US. She is the author of Chapter 7, The Role of Open Access in Enhancing Equitable Curricula and Research Outputs, Global Context. Dr. Ford, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brittany. And thank you to IGI for having us here today to promote this important work. And thank you, Daniel, for inviting us and having us here to help discuss this. So I come to this project from a different discipline. I work in educational research and educational leadership. So I came to this with that lens, kind of a different angle, a different take on open access. A lot of my research up until this point has had to do with equity and equalizing learning environments. However, having worked at several different institutions in the United States and working with students throughout Eastern Africa prior to living and working in Ethiopia during the 2019 and 2020 academic year, I did understand the difference in access. So I understood that depending on what your institution could offer through their academic library, depending on what was available, that's what you had access to. But it was while I was living and working in Ethiopia that it really became apparent to me how important open access is, how important those resources are that are available to everyone, and why that's important. And so I brought into this area of research that lens of social justice and equity. And having worked on projects looking at equity in K-12 systems throughout the United States, I was seeing some parallels in how we are expecting educators to prepare students in the same manner, but they're not given the same access to resources. And this affects motivation, persistence, and simply being able to do the work that is before them. So as you can see from the title of this chapter, I was really focusing on producing high quality curriculum and research outputs, and how difficult that is when you don't have access to the peer-reviewed literature, both journal articles and books, to be able to do that. And as Dr. Daniel spoke about in the introduction, this is really leading into the whole idea of epistemic injustice, one of the critical theory lenses that looks at an individual or a group's ability to know and communicate their knowledge. So we finished this chapter, but we're also extending that work into some future work specifically focused on that epistemic injustice lens and what it means to be limited in the knowledge you have access to, and how that affects the knowledge that you can then work with to produce the next level, the research or the any type of scholarly outputs that you may need to or want to do. So if you're limited in what you have to work with, it's like you don't have all of the tools in your toolbox and someone else has all of those tools and you're expected to produce the same scholarly outputs. And so we will be continuing to examine that, because the expectations on the scholars, the researchers, and the educators are the same, even though their access is different. And that's how open access can play an equalizing role in helping scholars to be able to reach the same scholarly outputs. As Horace Mann stated many, many years ago about education in the United States, that education is the great equalizer. Well, we're kind of taking that viewpoint that it is. There's agreement with that. However, if the educators themselves and the scholars do not have what they need to equip the next generation of students, educators in any discipline, we're actually, it's a social justice issue. We're actually seeing the injustice there. So that is kind of an introduction to our chapter, and I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ford. I really appreciate it, and thanks for joining us. I did just want to remind everyone, hold on to those questions. I know we've heard a lot about some great chapters so far. We do have one more to go through. Save your questions for the Q&A and bring them up in the chat. I'm sure the authors would love to address them. So next up, we do have Dr. Chris Helge from Rutgers University in North America, and he wrote Chapter 17, Reframing Educational Tools as Open Access and Sustainable Funding Models. Dr. Helge, go ahead.
Thank you, and I promise I'm not driving. Apologize for the background, but thank you to IGI and to Dr. Alemneh for this experience. Just want to compliment both. The process is very seamless and well organized. I had the opportunity to work with IGI on another project as on the editor side, so both of those experiences have been really great. And kind of the impetus for my chapter was basically kind of springboarding off of Dr. Alemneh's introduction and some of the inequity Dr. Ford just talked about. Basically, the pandemic highlighted a persistent problem that existed prior to COVID, but the general fact that many students, K through 12, college level, graduate school level, simply don't have proper access to certain types of hardware, such as laptops, tablets, and Wi-Fi or MiFi. And COVID really highlighted that when many students and faculty and staff were forced into an online environment. And so in my chapter, I basically advocate to include hardware and Wi-Fi and or MiFi devices under the guise of open access. For decades, many of us have advocated for more open access of e-content, journals, books, as many of the other authors have pointed out. And I basically take the angle in my chapter to advocate that funding should also be allotted under the umbrella of open access for certain types of hardware, whether it's laptops, MiFi devices, tablets, and also Wi-Fi. And so I also point out that this problem will exist post-COVID, due to hurricanes, fires. There are often shutdowns, unfortunately, in our current infrastructure in many countries. A personal experience, I went through one of the institutions I adjunct teach at, the University of Texas A&M's Law School. I teach a 7-week course there, and when one of the hurricanes last summer hit the Louisiana area, I lost a couple of students because they just simply didn't have appropriate access. So in the chapter, I go on to not only advocate that this will be a persistent problem, but try to provide some solutions. Again, pointing out that open access has enabled access to e-content, journals, books, other resources through philanthropic funding, through federal funding, state funding, even institutions kind of re-examining the funding they have internally to provide open access for various content. And so some of the examples I point out are really encouraging colleges and universities to re-examine post-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, some of the funding that exists, and is that funding still meaningful? Is it still relevant? If not, could some of that funding be repurposed for this idea of putting some type of device, laptops, tablets, in every student's hand? And I know some colleges and universities are pursuing that route, but also this idea of access to Wi-Fi or MiFi. And I looked at several examples in the United States, how communities are forming systems to provide Wi-Fi, not just for students, but basically to benefit many different industries. They're setting up geographic Wi-Fi hotspots that benefit hospitals, colleges, universities, emergency industries such as the police or ambulatory systems. So the funding actually reaches out to many members of the community, and then we look at how, students start K through 12, go through college, some, through graduate school or whatever. Ultimately, upon graduation, these students are benefiting these other industries as they graduate and go on to serve in various industries in the community. So the general idea is not just to create an open access funding source for one entity, but for really a system of a geographical area. So in general, you know, the chapter kind of looks at the problem, how it's persisted over a number of years, how COVID highlighted this, but you know how many of potential problems will continue to allow this problem, unfortunately, to persist. But then we look at also several different types of funding, whether it's through philanthropic funding. We highlight several state funding opportunities and federal funding opportunities that have been around for 10 plus years. We look at Sparks funding, OpenStax is out of Rice University's funded open access initiatives. And, you know, the question is really, what is the potential of applying that funding in this manner towards hardware and Wi-Fi? So that's kind of my chapter high level in a nutshell. Again, thanks to Dr. Alemneh and IGI, and hope you enjoyed the chapter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Helge. Okay, I'm going to join back in here, turn on my camera. Thank you so much to Dr. Alemneh and all the chapter authors again for joining us today and giving a little bit of additional perspective on your chapters. I think that's so important. This is a freely accessible title. It is fully open access, so it can be, you know, freely shared, freely accessed directly on our website, built upon in the academic community and utilized as a resource. So it is great to have kind of that overview and hear from the authors. I'm sure many people have questions about it. And it is kind of kismet. This is an open access publication about open access, which was opened up through essentially more or less an open access initiative that we collaborated on with University of North Texas. It's opened up through a library, edited by a librarian. There's so much cool stuff going on with this publication. So I do want to make sure that, you know, any questions you have, make sure you're holding on to them for the end. We can go over that during the Q&A, but I did just want to note kind of like the little nuances of this publication and how it all came together are really neat. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Brittany Haynes. I'm the Director of E-Collections at IGI Global, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about this collaboration that helped the book become opened up and our first platinum open access book publication. We do have a few journals that are platinum open access, but this is the first book, and we're really excited about it. This is just, you know, the direction we're heading, and I'll talk about our commitment to open access here in a moment. And I don't want to take up too much time because I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for that Q&A. But a little bit about the collaboration. I was actually able to work one-on-one with the University of North Texas as their representative last year. It started out, they were mostly interested in learning a little bit more about the individual titles that they purchased from us and looking at more, which led to a conversation about our e-collections and the overall value for our ebook collection, which contains all of our books, and then our e-journal collection, which contains all of our journals. And so interest grew from there because we were able to have that one-on-one conversation where they could look at the content and the better overall value they were getting for their library. They could open up transdisciplinary content across 11 subject areas, books, journals, advanced level peer-reviewed research. And then, you know, we also started talking about open access and what that might look like. And I think the key here is that University of North Texas in this particular initiative that we worked on with them, we were able to be flexible and look at options where they actually invested in that collection, both collections of ours, excuse me. And then we were actually able to, based on the investment in those collections, open up and fully fund this publication through our Read and Publish initiative that we offered, as well as actually looked at unlimited article and chapter conversions for their faculty throughout that 1 year period, which has passed at this point, but I believe it was March of last year to March of this year, looking at public articles and chapters coming individually from University of North Texas not librarians, but researchers, which have to go through the peer review process. I do think it's important to note with the Wild Wild West that OA is that any publisher who's producing OA, to be credible, of course, it needs to go through that same process, the peer review process, be accepted, if there needs to be revisions, everything like that. So I do just want to note, obviously, that process looks the exact same at least with IGI Global, you know, you're coming in, you go through the same publishing process, it goes through that peer review, and then upon acceptance with this particular initiative that we worked on with UNT, we can look at opening up, going back over that year and opening up those chapters and articles from their faculty's corresponding authors, and then this entire publication, which has been really ideal. I know a big part of this goes along with just our commitment to DEIA as well. Being able to look at entire publications, open them up, fully supporting them under open access really makes it a little bit more equitable across the board, because not only is it supporting University of North Texas researchers like Dr. Alemneh, but then anyone around the world who was then contributing to this publication had that opportunity to be under open access. So just having these conversations really supporting the inclusivity and equitability of open access in this whole movement, Plan S, you know, mandates, everything like that. And just being able, I think it's important for libraries, publishers, even organizations with publishers to have these conversations on what that might look like. Where can we collaborate to ensure that this is getting out there to more researchers around the world? Because on the flip side of that, not only can it benefit the researchers who are contributing, wanting to publish under open access, but then of course, with this entire publication being opened up, it can be used widely, and there is no, it's not locked behind any kind of paywall with the electronic content. So we were able to support publishing this publication under that. This is really the first kind of collaboration of this kind. Like I said, this is our premier Platinum Open Access book. Being fully supported through this investment in our e-collections, and we are looking at other open access opportunities as well. This is really just increasing that research support across the board. And it was a pleasure to work with the University of North Texas Library, just hopping on conversations where, you know, I was speaking with the scholarly communications librarians, talking about what does open access look like at your institution? What kind of questions are you getting? And then working with, you know, Kobe Condry in the acquisition side of things, the collection side, looking at that content. Because with this sort of thing, you are looking at opening up more access content to your institution while also looking at those open access opportunities. So I think the flexibility there was key to that conversation. And just a couple questions I wanted to quickly address before we move on to the Q&A. You know, how does it support researchers to have their work available under open access? I think the chapter authors and Dr. Alemneh already really covered this. These are just things I think we can all think about moving forward. But of course, we do know in the industry, anything opened up under open access typically has about an 89% higher download rate. Obviously, it's not locked behind that paywall. Anyone can build upon it, especially if it's under that CC BY 4.0 license, which our open access publications are under, wherein the authors own the copyright of their publications. So definitely enables them to then have higher accessibility and discoverability of their work. Lots of comments I've been getting back from faculty around OA and from our open access team are that, you know, it also helps, of course, with citation, but just getting their research out there. They want to be able to talk about this in the community. They want as many people to see their work as possible. So, you know, this is just the direction things are heading towards open access. Why support open access through your library or organization? Of course, you can support your faculty and researchers. We can have those conversations, but I know a lot of institutions are also adding to their scholarly communications, either having that librarian or even in some cases a department looking at what does supporting open access mean to our library. And some are more far along than others. And then same thing for publishers. You know, we're trying to figure out what that looks like exactly. Where is this heading? How can we do things like agreements or initiatives that can help add value to what we're already doing? And then, of course, we can look at things like if an institution or a library is working with us, publishers can also look at offering things like discounts when we're looking at things like full open access agreements. That way, the processing charges to publish under open access are lessened, that sort of thing. So the last question to consider, what do flexible library publisher OA collaborations look like? And I think just this collaboration with the University of North Texas is a great example. We have had other collaborations. This one, obviously, we are particularly excited about because of the Platinum Open Access book. It's just really those one-on-one conversations, being able to have this dialogue, even things like this, where we can all come on together. There's Q&A, there's back and forth, just having that conversation to see what that might look like is critical. I've had many conversations, particularly over the past year, where, you know, each library looks different. researchers in certain parts of the world look at open access from a myriad of ways and go to their library with different questions about it, but it all kind of loops back around to where is this going in the future? So I think the importance here is that, at least here at IGI Global, we want to be open to conversations about what unique and innovative solutions can look like, as well as offering other options. So, you know, we offer open access publishing opportunities across books, across journals. We are actually, and very excited to announce that we are converting the remaining hybrid IGI Global open access journals to full gold open access. That should be within the next year or so, by 2023. We also are offering, you know, open access agreements, transformative options, sometimes flexible options like this one, if that's what the library is looking for. I think just having, like I said, having that conversation, looking at publishing appetite from the faculty, having researchers recommend that their libraries actually speak with us, usually gets that conversation going, because the libraries do actually, of course, rely on their researchers for their expert opinions. And then, of course, we offer Platinum Open Access books, this one being the first, and then journals. We also have 2 journals currently that are under Platinum Open Access pictured here. So we are strongly committed to open access. We see that's the future, and, you know, really converting our full journal portfolio is going to be a big part of that. So I'm definitely interested to hear additional questions, especially for the chapter authors and for Dr. Alemneh, asking if there's something you heard in this presentation. Please feel free to ask about it now, or if you have questions about IGI Global and our open access publishing or options, please feel free to ask those too. But you can reach out to me directly here. My email is on the screen. Whether you are a researcher or a librarian, we'd be happy to have that conversation. So I do want to shift into the Q&A for the last 15 minutes. We can go ahead and moderate. Please feel free. I believe you have access to the chat function, where you can drop a question in, or there's also the hand raise function. And then my colleague Cheyenne will help us monitor these. And as they come through, even if all of the chapter authors want to go ahead and turn back on their cameras, if your connection lets you do so. I know internet can be finicky, but we can go ahead and get started. And then if there were any last comments, especially even within the chapter authors and Dr. Alemneh, if you wanted to comment on anything you heard earlier, elaborate a little bit, please feel free to do so now.
Well, actually, they did really well, you know, within that limited time, they convey really the highlights of their works. But I noticed there are some authors in the audience, you know, they can chime in and add if they, you know, they want to as well. So I just want
Oh, yes, definitely. If you are a chapter author, please just let us know in the chat, and or Dr. Alemneh, if you know which ones are here, we can go ahead and enable, I believe, their video camera and their microphone if they would like to say something.
Yeah.
Okay, I do see a question. Cheyenne, are you able to see that? For some reason, it's not popping up on my screen, but I saw it pop up initially. Oh, here we go. I think I can see it now. So our first question is, will it be possible to be indexed in Scopus? So that's a great question. At least from the publisher side of things, I can say that we do work very closely with all the major indices. They do receive access to all of our content to review. And with it being open access, I know more people will have access to be able to cite and work with this publication. So there are no guarantees that something will be indexed in Scopus until it is, but I will just say from the publisher side of things, this definitely opens it up to be recognized more highly. Did any of Dr. Alemneh or any of the authors want to comment on that at all based on your experience?
Well, you know, on similar line, you know, since IGI is one of the pioneers in terms of supporting open access, now, you know, I noticed increasingly more institutions are coming up with this kind of arrangement. Dr. Malkamu mentioned Addis Ababa University is trying to negotiate with other publishers. And the university I am at right now, serving as Fulbright scholar here at University of Pretoria, actually, they just last week announced that together with South African National Library and Information Consortium, they signed a read and publish agreement with different publishers, including Emerald and ACM and that kind of. So I think this trend is really growing, and I want to see how growing, like how is the magnitude with an IGI in terms of collaborating with other institutions internationally.
That's a good point. I will say that a big part of it is just seeing more of these pop up. I mean, if you look in the industry news anytime, I don't know if anyone follows Scholarly Kitchen or Charleston Hub, they put on the Charleston Conference for Librarians every year. There's just more and more open access agreements popping up, read and publish, publish and read. It's definitely gaining a large following. From everything I have heard, as far as Plan S, it grew larger in Europe. It's kind of taken over, and then it's shifting quite a bit in North America as well and across other parts of the world. And I think just looking at those flexible arrangements has been key. Really having conversations. We're a medium-sized publisher too, an independent medium-sized publisher. So libraries can look at negotiations like this, collaborations like this, and then use that to even negotiate a little bit differently with the larger publishers. I think that's a point to keep in mind as well when you're working with a group that can be a little bit more flexible because they are smaller. We can kind of push back. Not that great deals don't happen with the larger publishers, of course, but you can always look at, well, I was able to do this here. What can we do to make sure we do something a little bit more similar on that front as far as the open access and transformative agreement? So I think it's just a unique tool. Like when you diversify your portfolio as far as who you're working with in the industry, you can then bring some of those new perspectives into negotiations for libraries, at least. So your comments just made me think of that as well.
Other aspect is, was there any consideration of such collaboration among publishers, like as opposed to just only with institution? Even different publishers come together with similar policies and agreements, and that's those kind of, as opposed to working in silo. Was there any, possible way of collaborating among publishers as well?
So I don't want to neglect if there is some groups out there that I may not be aware of personally, but I do know, like even this past year at the Charleston Conference that I had mentioned earlier, I did a presentation with Angie Mays, a librarian from the University of Kentucky Libraries, and we actually talked about library publisher collaborations, and at the end we were just really talking about the need for bringing not only libraries and publishers together, but even perhaps doing something like a coalition of publishers of various sizes, or of the small and medium-sized publishers to start, and like having these conversations where, I mean, nothing is really standardized. That's the thing. So many people are doing different things with open access as far as like agreements, different things that they're offering, whether it be read and publish, publish and read, fully open access where you're not investing in content. But we're certainly open to having those conversations or forming like a group of publishers and talking about that a little bit more. Whether librarians would also be welcome. Maybe like talk about putting together a little coalition of sorts. I do know we just joined a couple of things like OA Switchboard, Open Access Switchboard. That is something we just integrated with, things like that. And I'd be happy to pass over materials to anyone who wants to know a little bit more about those collaborations too.
Is there any question from the audience? In the meantime, like, since the topic is close to our heart, particularly for those of us from information science area, but in other discipline, like I think Dr. Ford kind of can represent maybe other disciplines. How is like open access acceptance in discipline like education, which you are closely linked, and how is the trend, and how the current pandemic kind of wakes up, as other fields like education. So since I know a little bit, but could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So with education, of course, as Dr. Helge was saying, everyone was thrust into online learning. Sure, some people prior to the pandemic were doing online learning, but because of the restrictions, everyone was kind of thrust there. And it really did highlight the need for equity in resources, and again, as Dr. Helge was saying, even in internet access. There were many places within the United States, and then of course globally, where students and educators did not have access to internet. They didn't have the tools they needed, even if they did have access to internet. So there was that aspect of it, but it really highlighted textbooks, as was discussed about OpenStax and having OER, a lot more open, available resources for educators. When students and teachers could no longer actually get to the physical brick and mortar building because of all of the restrictions, it became apparent who was able to get to those resources online and who maybe had more challenges or was unable to. So it really did highlight that. And so there is a push in many areas of education to not only open things up, but now also to utilize what's available virtually as opposed to just the brick and mortar buildings. So hopefully I answered your question a little bit, but ask again if there's something else I should expand on, please.
Is there any other question from the audience, or is there anybody wants to comment? As I said, I saw some authors there, so don't be shy. Feel free to jump in and share your experience.
Do we have anyone raising their hand, Cheyenne or Genevieve, perhaps? I'm not seeing any new comments in the chat. Please feel free to drop them there as well, or use the raise hand reaction, which is under the reactions option. I did have a question, and I'm coming at this with no experience in your fields, obviously, but Dr. Helge and Dr. Ford, it seemed like there was some overlap in some of the topics that you were talking about, especially as far as technology and accessibility there. Did you happen to collaborate at all? Are you seeing similar things happening, Dr. Helge, about what Dr. Ford was just speaking on? I just saw those connections there, and I didn't know if there was any way you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, so locally, some of the research that I pointed out in the chapter is, unfortunately, some of the K through 12 institutions, when you looked at them, they literally lost 30%. They have documented they lost 30% of their students during the pandemic due to not having access to laptops or just basic tools. So there's the whole issue of open access at the high level of, you have to have open access to the content, right? To the articles, the books, and everything. But one of my arguments in the chapter was you also have to have access to the tools to get to the content. And there's some other examples I point out in the chapter where universities also, a lot of them were community colleges, again, lost right at 30% of their students. And this wasn't just for a semester, it was a year, in some cases 2 years. In some cases, institutions are still dealing with trying to figure out a way to get those students back. So I'm not exactly sure if I completely answered your questions. Dr. Ford and I had not collaborated prior to this. It sounds like there's definitely an opportunity to collaborate, going forward and trying to continue to maybe, extend the research and come up with solutions for these issues. So I don't know if Dr. Ford wanted to add to that as well.
No, I would just piggyback on that. Yes, I do think we both very much know there's a lot of room for more that needs to be studied, and like you said, coming up with some solutions, but we could definitely discuss talking about some of that, collaborating.
Well, I know a publisher who would be interested in learning more about that publication and maybe even doing another book. It sounds like there's so many connections here. I did have a question, and then we also have a question in the chat. I do want to extend our questions, if that's fine with everyone, for an additional 5 minutes, because I feel like we did go over earlier. Is that fine? Are all the authors able to stick with us? Okay, perfect. So 2 questions, one from the audience, and then I also had one as well, but from Shirley Jin. She says, Dr. Prianto, how can librarians get a better understanding of the research in open access? I noticed you said some librarians did not quite understand much about OA. Did you want to elaborate on that, Dr. Prianto? Let me know if you'd like me to repeat it as well.
Okay. What I noticed in 2015, from my research, it shows that librarians considers that, for example, opening abstract has been an open access, for example. So they didn't understand that they should open completely. So they just open their abstract, for example, and then in practice, sometimes the problem with the open access is about the policy. So the policy is whether open access is completely open or half open, for example. So this is what I mean by not quite understand much about open access. So they consider that even opening the abstract is open access. So that happens, and then we try to make them understand better by having seminars and workshops and discussions with librarians. So that is what we are actually doing in the last few years. Thank you.
Did that answer your question? Feel free to pop back into the chat if you had a follow-up. In the meantime, Dr. Alemneh, I did want to ask you, what was it like working with international researchers on your publication, and how would you describe perhaps the inclusivity and equitability of, or mostly the inclusivity of, the chapters? Because I do know they come from various countries. Obviously, we have chapter authors from around the world here today. Could you comment a little bit more on that? I know you briefly touched on it earlier.
Indeed, yeah. Well, I mentioned in my introduction, preface, actually, how most of the authors, actually, we know each other somehow. We work together on the same area, the same topic. We advocate, So it's a kind of culmination of those year-long advocates and research and promotion on the topic area. So it was not that difficult because everybody was passionate about it. Everybody was really into this open access movement. It was really easy to bring together everybody, and for me, it's really easy because of the fact that they are passionate about their topic.
Great, thank you. I do want to pull up, we do have another 2 minutes for questions, but I did want to go ahead and pull up contact information for everyone because we obviously want to continue this dialogue. I am sure Dr. Alemneh, Dr. Ford, Dr. Helgi, Dr. Bayana, and Dr. Prianto will want to continue this conversation if you have questions. I know if there's any questions about the book itself, they're great for that. Feel free to direct them to IGI Global as well, and we can always even loop you into contact with the authors if they want to continue that conversation. And then, even just questions about open access agreements, recommending that we have conversations with your libraries from IGI Global's point of view, or if you're a librarian, if you want to know more about what this kind of process looks like, we're always happy to talk about that more. So I did just want to have this slide up as we do the last question or two, if there are any, in case you want to contact us.
And in the meantime, I would like to acknowledge really all authors who really give their time and they work hard to meet the deadline, and the reviewers who really work hard again around the clock to give high quality feedback, and of course IGI for from the beginning to the end for shepherding the whole process, my institution for unanimously selecting and voting for my book to go in this new arrangement, and Fulbright. So actually, one of the reason Dr. Ford and I met was through Fulbright, but the time and the connection, the network I created through Fulbright was immense. And this book is completely benefited from Fulbright, so I'm very, very grateful for Fulbright program. So yeah, this is only the beginning. As you said, many ideas coming up. So we'll continue working on this issue, and we are excited with the new theory coming out of this. This systemic issue is very sensitive and interesting. So definitely it will continue and see different angles. Kind of twist the issue and bring up some theory into it and how to explain those issues from deep theoretical perspective as well. So it's getting better.
Definitely. And I will just say, I wanted to say thank you as well, not only to those chapter authors who were able to join us today and speak, but all of the others on the publication. As Dr. Alemneh mentioned, there are 18 chapters. I am going to back this up. So pardon me, just to the slide about the book. As we close out today, feel free, of course, to check it out. We do have the QR code up on the screen. You can also find it at IGI-global.com. It's freely accessible through open access, so definitely check this publication out a little bit more if you have questions about it. I'm sure the chapter authors and Dr. Alemneh would be very excited to address them. It looks like there are no other questions. We do have from Raquel Merlot. Congrats, Dr. Alemneh, all the authors, and the IGI team. Great initiative. Thank you so much, Raquel. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. We will go ahead and close up for today. This session, as you saw at the top of your screen, was recorded, so we will pass this out to people who registered as well. So keep an eye out for that.
Yep. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.